Welcome everybody, I'm Santiago Kneeland and this is The Divine Within, the invisible connection with God. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the second mile. What is it to really be and explore one of the most practical and transformative spiritual skills that we can develop? Learning how to truly love another person. Joining me is Susan Lyon, longtime student of the Urantia book, author, artist, poet, and devoted seeker of truth whose spiritual journey has been guided by a lifelong passion for understanding both God and human connection. Together we'll explore why people stop feeling heard, how Jesus instinctively met people exactly where they were, and what it means to go the second mile, choosing to love others in the way they needed to be loved, rather than the way that comes most naturally to us. Because sometimes the greatest expression of divine love isn't a grand gesture, it's learning to speak someone else's language. So welcome, Susan. It's a pleasure having you here.
Thanks, Santiago. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
And this is an interesting topic, and I'm glad that you brought it up because we sometimes do not communicate correctly, and it's really important to understand behind it. So in this first segment, we're going to be talking about why we stop feeling heard. So we all want the same thing, to feel seen, valued, and understood. Yet many relationships don't fail because communication stops. They struggle because somewhere along the way, people stop feeling heard. In this segment, we'll explore why connection breaks down, why family becomes our greatest classroom for learning love, and how understanding begins long before we even speak. So tell us about this language and the different types of language. It's very interesting, the way that we can communicate. Susan.
Well, I think from the beginning, when we're born, we begin to interpret each other through even just visual uh, cues. You know, long before we can even speak, we're taking cues from parents and from others and interpreting emotion and the love and care from them, even visually from body language. And that's the beginning of communication. Um, as far as communication goes, it can be expressed in many ways, and that's how love is shared. And for us to know ourselves to begin with, what we need, it's kind of hard to put a finger on that as well. But sometimes when you feel hurt, it might be a cue or a clue to you exactly where your needs are most for those needs, emotional needs, to be met. And it's also a journey learning those you're communicating with what their needs are as well. And relationships evolve, so it's a constant learning process. Not obviously when you meet new people, it's, you begin to learn. And that was the interest I had in this, was the psychology of that, really, because you really put ourselves out there in the normal, natural way we express ourselves. That doesn't always meet another person's needs. Even you
Mm-hmm.
love them 100% in your own style, and it could be missing the mark of what their need really is. So it's a give and take and a learning process all the
Yeah.
way. And to guess is to probably miss the mark. And so it's about communicating and asking rather than assuming, and or loving the natural way. And then if you observe that the results aren't working that you hope for, rather than being disappointed or heard or feeling unheard, rather to go ahead and ask, what do you need? How are you feeling? And basically that is what it is listening to engaging the response that you get when you're projecting love. And that way you're not feeling hurt or unloved when you feel like you're doing everything you can do. It's a fine tuning thing, but it's an
Yeah.
art, and it can be a challenge, but it's also rewarding when you've, cracked the code with the psychology of what someone needs.
So this is interesting, and I mean, you just brought a lot of information, and I mean, I took a lot of notes, but in a general sense, You started off with the nonverbal language, and I think that's very important. Anytime that you come into a room, it depends on your mood. You know, and I was talking the other day with my cousin. He was in a podcast, and how feel empathy, and you come into a room, and he's a very lovable guy, very charismatic, and how he can change the tone and the feeling inside a room just with his expression of his corporality, of his nonverbal expression. So how important that is. And I, for instance, I get a lot of cues. I've been a salesman for all my life, and I get a lot of cues from, just I don't even pay attention to it. It's like just there, and the way that people talk and how they relate to me or they interact. I kind of pick up cues. So it's really important to take into consideration. But you're saying into something, you're taking into something more active, more proactive, where, like you said, it's a two-way frequency, and it's asking, not assuming. So this is interesting because you can have, the will to communicate, but you also have to have somebody that understands this, and how important it is, if you don't even understand how to communicate, to really understand what each one needs in that communication. So how can you, or how does this work, or how did this come about? And realizing that there's different communications and there's styles of communication.
Well, first of all, we've for years seen how perfectly Jesus communicated and how successful he was. And I well, actually, my husband, Rick, gave me a book called The Love Languages of God by Dr. Gary
Hmm.
Chapman. And he had read it years ago. And I was astonished how modern psychology actually fits right in to how Jesus did it. And
Okay.
I always thought of Jesus' communication style as being perfect because he was divine. But the more I checked into it, I realized, if you could put the word listened into the search engine, Jesus listened attentively to his, and there's so many times
Mm,
as it said that was how he went about getting to know people, gauging their receptivity, learning what they needed. And that's where he said the best way to understand people is to be friendly, to put yourself out there and to learn what they need most and then do it for them if you're sure that's what they need and want. And that was how he met all relationships. And what's interesting is he's revealing to us that's exactly what God does. He loves us in the way we need to be loved. We just need to understand it. And it comes through other people. And we also share God's love through us to others as well. We're the
yeah.
on the ground way of sharing God's love. So it's an art form, really. When we say communication, we think just language, but it's far more than that. And there's a an art to it.
So what does this book tell us in the languages? Because I think this is very interesting, and I've seen it with my children, and we've talked about this, and how my wife knows about these different styles of communication, let's say. So what can you tell us about these styles, and then we're going to compare that to how Jesus, expressed and communicated. But what are more or less? I mean, we don't have to go in depth, but more or less, so that the audience can understand.
Well, Dr. Gary Chapman separated it into five love languages,
Okay.
and um, they they briefly are labeled as uh, like words of affirmation,
Mm-hmm.
quality time, physical touch,
Okay.
acts of service, and gifts. Now,
Ok-
and we could go into a little detail about that. Like, somebody might misunderstand and say gifts. Well, that means that's a material person that they just want gifts. But it's very much more about the appreciation of the effort that goes into choosing a gift to
Okay.
the people
It's
that
the detail. It's the detail that counts, right?
it's
It's
yeah,
intention that counts.
that's what it all comes down to, and we're all products of how we were raised, method we were given love by parents and siblings, the family around us. So if you received thoughtful gifts and that was how you were shown love, you might,
Yeah.
you know, really still need that from others or a mate or, whatever. But that's how it all happens is we have our natural method of receiving love, and not all children receive love in the way they need it. And that's another thing. Children are sort of vulnerable because they're not able to really express well what they need. And unless you're asking them, and there are kind of games you can play with them as well to kind of pull it out of them what they would prefer, what makes them happy. You can see the response on someone's face when they receive love in the way that's really connecting with their heart, with their emotion. You can see it in their face, really, if you're observing. Like you said, you pick up the cues. So,
Yeah.
the love languages, though, Jesus did the same thing. He gave. He was very generous. He gave when it was needed. He was very attentive for the words of affirmation. He was always positively building up people to be strong and positive. And as far as affection and physical touch, we're told many times how he put a hand on someone's shoulder to encourage them, or he would, just touch their arm or whatever, just to show that there was love, and that's sometimes all it's needed. It doesn't, physical touch means they just need to know that you care enough to reach out for them. And I think we talked about that can be culturally gauged. Sometimes it's a hug is appropriate. Sometimes maybe you just pay attention to what the person needs and how they respond.
So you were saying, Susan, and it's really, it comes down to paying attention. But so how because in the end, I mean, we're talking about the communicate or relationships don't fail. It's communication. So I can understand, and I can relate. With my wife at after 15, 17 years basically of a marriage and three kids, and we were different persons when we met 20 some years ago, no, 17 some years ago, not that much, but she was an attorney. So how can you evolve, and this is important, and the more I think about it, in the communication, where you can keep that communication, and that can keep fresh, because in the end, I mean, you're living with the same person, and that kind of breaks down. So what is it that you can do as practical, I mean, apart from what you're saying, to have that communication, that dual, that back and forth that you're saying.
Well, it's always evolving, and as you get older, things change. But
Yeah,
I think being like in the moment and keeping it spontaneous and genuine is the key. Um, Not ever taking
yeah,
for granted that things are like they were 20 years ago because you're growing together. But there's always, I mean, first of all, you're not together unless you love each other. You're
yeah,
there.
yeah. It's a
And
choice. It's an everyday choice. Yeah,
yeah. And so you give the other person, the grace to know that they're loving you in the way they know best, and to accept the love as it's intended, and to express your needs, um, instead of, there's a negative way of going about that. And we don't want that. We want a positive way of reinforcing.
yeah,
That really is awesome. I love when you do that. Or, you know,
yeah,
there's
yeah.
positive way to encourage that. Or I
Which is
really,
really important, and you don't notice, and you get into a rut. That's something that you cannot get into those cycles, and it's important to realize that you're in that cycle and kind of break it, and create like you're saying, a positive cycle, a
yeah,
loop.
that can happen at any time. I mean, you don't want to form the negative cycles, but they can always be improved or broken. And
Yeah,
that was one of the things I read in the doctor's book about. Of course, he's a clinical psychologist, so he's had, zillions of customers, clients that have gone through these problems, and it's always possible to fix a relationship. And that is what it is. It's not just marriage, but it's family. It can be a
Yeah.
relationship with anyone
Your
that can always
father.
be improved. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Interesting. So it's really important that we learn how to communicate. And we're going to close this segment right here, and we're going to go into to see how Jesus communicated. So stick around. On the Divine Within podcast, we'll share real conversations to help you find a personal connection with God. My goal is to support your faith, growth, and journey toward discovering the divine within yourself. Join us to deepen your faith and spiritual journey.